All right, I think I'm going to start now. My name is Jacqueline McGregor, and I am currently the acting president of the Kootenay-Columbia-Southern Rockies riding, which is a new riding that was created last year, and we're having our one and only online um, riding-wide debate between our candidates, our nomination candidates, and that's Keith Page and Kallee Lenz. And they've been attending lots of events over the last 6 weeks. And Creston, Bernie, well, not Creston yet. Creston's coming up 5:15 at the library. And so if any of you live in Creston, it would be really nice to see you this weekend, Saturday. And yeah, we've been hosting events in Cranbrook, Kimberley, Caslow Trail so far. So I'd like to introduce our moderator, who is Amanda McGregor. Amanda is currently the coordinator of the Nelson Committee on Homelessness, and she's graciously agreed to moderate our session today, and she's going to explain a few more things to everyone and how this is all going to work. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. So first, I really want to acknowledge our ability to live and work on these lands today. We are in direct benefit of policies of expulsion and assimilation of our Indigenous peoples during the time of our settlement and confederation and since then. The harms of these policies are many and are still being felt in our Indigenous communities today. So, our everyday work is a long term and multi generational work to engage in our courageous conversations to heal these relationships with our Indigenous communities and the land that we have abused, colonized, and profited from. Today, we are grounded in gratitude for the Indigenous peoples, the Sinayaks, the Tanaha, the Silix, and the many diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people who have and will continue to steward and protect these lands we call home. So thank you so much. So just some Zoom housekeeping. This is being recorded and we will put this up on YouTube afterwards. Everyone is muted and will be unmuted when I acknowledge. We have our amazing Emerson Kelly, who is our IT person. He will start our IT timers. Our timers. He'll post questions or other relevant items into the chat column. Keith Wiley is our question monitor. So get your questions now. Put them in now. Let's get these questions flowing. We'll choose questions both in order and also to try to make sure that we're not duplicating questions that have already been answered. This forum is one of a number of events with nominees leading up to the 24-hour online vote, which takes place on February 27th. Just a reminder, you're eligible to vote for one of the candidate nominees if you have an up-to-date membership before the 45-day cutoff, which was January 13th. So if you missed it, you missed it. You'll receive an email on February 27th with a link from, it's called Simply Voting. So look out for it. If you have questions regarding this process, please contact any of us, whoever you know best, or our president who is just on. As of January 14th, in our Columbia-Kootenay-Southern Rockies electoral district, we had about 500 NDP members eligible to vote. But of course, we have many more NDP supporters out there, and tonight we're going to discover who those could be. In a moment here, I'll be asking the candidates to give us their 2-minute opening remarks. Then we'll have 6 questions that the riding executive has asked the candidates to respond to. And after that, we'll have a special message from our acting EDA president, Jacqueline McGregor. And then it's on to you. The folks here are joining us this evening to get your questions. So now please put your questions to us and we'll start taking those questions in already. You can submit them now in the Zoom question form. I would like to remind you, please ask questions, not statements. We all like to share our beliefs on these really important issues because they all affect us, but please position your questions as questions, and make them concise. Brevity is a strength. If your question is picked, I will ask if you want to ask your question in the Zoom, and we will unmute you. You have only 1 minute. Well, actually, you're not going to have a whole minute to ask your question. Please keep it short. Questions are being selected from those submitted vetted for relevance and to avoid repetition. As I said earlier, if you have any questions regarding this process, please put them in the chat and our amazing IT team will try to support you. And finally, at 6:15, we will get our last question, and then we'll have some time for the nominees to do their concluding remarks. So, candidate nominees. We'll now hear a brief introduction from our candidates. We previously tossed a coin, so which one of you goes first?
I think it was Tails.
It's Tails. Okay, Tails goes first. You will have so you'll have your opening remarks and then we'll get to the questions. Without further ado, please.
Excellent. The timer. Great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Kallee Linz. I'm currently based here in Nelson. I'm in my office as the Executive Director of the West Kootenay Regional Arts Council. That is a bit of a misnomer. My organization serves the entire Columbia Basin region, 180,000 square kilometers. And one of the great privileges of my work is stewarding a contract on behalf of the Columbia Basin Trust to put direct financial investment into the hands of cultural organizations and individual artists across the basin. I am from the region. I'm from the Kootenays originally. I was raised in Castlegar. And after graduation, I hopped over to McGill University specifically to study political science. And it was really there that I formalized my involvement with the NDP. At that time, my peers and I were very active mobilizing against the Harper government, specifically all of those dreadful things like mandatory minimum sentencing, the muzzling of scientists, all of those nightmares that sadly we're all remembering again as we watch Poilievre take the stage. I hopped over to Toronto for grad school and found myself working in the nonprofit sector over there for the next 10 years, specifically working within nationally serving organizations. I spent a good deal of time in the public policy team of Imagine Canada, and that's really where I cut my teeth on federal policy research, development, and lobbying. My team and I were very successful in shaping support programs during COVID to be inclusive of the nonprofit and charitable sector. I was deeply involved in the NDP there as well, in the riding of Toronto Danforth, which was Jack Layton's riding. And then jumping forward a little bit, my now husband and I made the move to the Kootenays 3 years ago. It's been a wonderful homecoming for me. I'm so grateful to serve not only my current organization, but other community organizations and support regional development through that work.
Thanks, Kallee.
I just jump in? I'll do it. Hi, everybody. My name is Keith Page. I'm a city councilor here in Nelson and a director with the Regional District of Central Kootenay. I grew up on Rainbow Valley Ranch out near Three Hills, Alberta, which is the Page family farm that we've had in our family for a good 100 years. I grew up for the first 20 years of my life raising 300 head of cattle with my sisters, brothers, and grandparents, which was a mixed grain operation over 6 sections of land. That wasn't the kind of work that could send the kids to college. So when I graduated, I went straight to the city and worked my way up through the tech support industry and providing support and networking and learning my way along the job. That experience gave me a lot of opportunity to problem solve and work with complex systems. In 2006, my partner got a job here in Nelson with the Ministry of Transportation, and so I followed him out to Nelson and started to set down roots and started a local tech company here on Vernon Street. In 2014, I stepped up and joined the Nelson Fire Rescue Auxiliary, serving for 4 years before stepping into local government. I was elected to Nelson City Council in 2018, and where I've been focusing on affordable housing, environmental action, and addressing income inequality, all within the scope of what local government can do to shape our built environment. I also took on the role of chair of recreation and have been working there to improve community spaces and programs. In 2022, I was reelected and have been working closely with local leaders across the region, serving as the president of the Association of Kootenay Boundary Local Governments, where we've been advocating for rural communities at the provincial level. Through all this work, I've learned that our communities need stronger support from the federal government. I believe we can do better by bringing back real constituency services, tackling affordability from the federal level, and making sure our rural communities aren't left behind.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Kallee. So now we're going to move on to the standing questions for the evening. Just a reminder for anyone that has a burning question, please put it in the chat. We're going to start with the first question. And I'll direct it to someone at the end, and I'm going to keep track, and then we'll each get a turn. After your response, then the other person will have a chance to rebut for 1 minute. So the first question is, oh, it's in the chat. I've shortened it a little bit, but the Trump has vowed to impose levies of up to 25% on all imports that come into the US, a plan that could cost the Canadian economy billions. What's your message for voters on the issue of tariffs or even American annexation? Kallee.
Thanks for that question, Amanda. The message I really wanted to share is that we need to remember that tariffs will hurt the US. I think it's easy to have tunnel vision on the comparatively low impact of our retaliatory tariffs against the US. But we have really great lessons to look at from when aluminum and steel were heavily taxed with tariffs in 2018 and 2019. We can look at the damage that was inflicted on the US there for some lessons about how this is going to go for the states. While there were some new jobs added during that period, the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimated that as a result of consumer price increases, those jobs that were retained cost $260,000 each American every single year. So this is an incredibly costly endeavor that the US is embarking on. I think it's fair to remember that we are on the same side as American consumers. And if there's one thing that Trump really hates, it's losing his bragging rights. He likes to think that he was carried to success in the election based on what he would call low levels of inflation, economic success. He is at risk of losing any of those bragging rights. And everyday Americans, I think, are going to start standing up alongside governors and senators who are in red states that are very particularly targeted by the list of retaliatory tariffs that Canada has drawn up. Thanks to everyday Canadians for doing their part as well. But I feel like we need to hold strong on the understanding that it's not just our efforts that are going to hurt Americans, it is their own tariffs themselves. And everything points to our success going forward.
Thanks, Kallee. Keith?
Yeah, we live next to the world's biggest economy, and it comes with a lot of opportunity, and it comes with a lot of risk as it grows increasingly unpredictable. I think this is an opportunity for us to start looking east to west and ensuring that we're starting to add value to our resource industry in terms of bringing back manufacturing and investing in businesses. There are lots of opportunities, particularly within the Kootenays, whether it's forestry support in Cranbrook or high-tech manufacturing that's trying to set itself up in Meadow Alley and Trail. There's lots of great work that can still be done supporting the agricultural industry in Creston and beyond. And I think this is a wake-up call for Canadians to look at the opportunities to build in greater support and jobs for processing the resources that we have in our area. And I think we need to be focused on ensuring that our workers are supported as the tariffs have their expected impact on our economy. I think we're stronger than we know and then we sometimes appreciate. So I feel like we're in good company, but we have to take it on as something that needs to be focused on. I've asked at City Council even, we had a 30-point response to the recessionary forces of COVID, and I've asked the economic development team to put together something similar for this, so we can focus out on where we're going to be strong and where we can bring people to our region to support our economy during this time. And I think we can do it. I think we reject the panic and fear. I think Trump is trying to goad us into certain kinds of responses. And I think we turn in and we focus in and we see where we can diversify and sell our products elsewhere. Aluminum is in high demand. There are many countries that still want our product, and we will just need to shift where we're sending things.
Thank you, Keith. Kallee, do you have anything to rebut?
I would. Yeah, thanks, Amanda. I agree with Keith that adding value into our manufacturing chains and shifting our trading partners will work over the long term. But those are pieces that will take a while to put into effect, and there will be intense pressures on our labor force in the short term. I wanted to remind everyone on this call that we have templates coming out of COVID that we can reactivate. We have some programs that were remarkably effective at supporting jobs in small and medium-sized businesses, specifically the Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy Program and the Canadian Emergency Business Account. These are programs that I know very well because these were the programs that I was specifically shaping to be amenable to the nonprofit sector and to ensure that the eligibility worked for our community organizations. I would encourage everyone to work with their industry partners and organizations working on their behalf to lobby for these supports in the near term.
Ooh, good on the time there, folks. Okay, so thank you for that. We're on to our next question. And because we're going to be going back and forth, I will be directing this next question to you, Keith. According to right-wing populists, high taxes and big government are causing our affordability crisis. They often label the NDP the high tax and spend party. We like to spend. What is your response to this?
Yeah, we're all familiar with the right-wing rhetoric that politicians on that side like to blame high taxes and big government for the affordability issues we're facing. But if we're really looking at what's causing life to be more expensive here in our riding and across the country, it's corporations charging record high prices while posting record high profits. It's real estate investors jacking up rents while people are struggling to afford a home. And all the conservatives really want to do is give more tax breaks or throw out large numbers out of context and scare the population into thinking that there's going to be big savings there. I believe that what we need to be doing is cracking down on what's going on in the price gouging. People are paying more than 20% for groceries, and big grocery stores are pulling in major profits. The same is happening in oil. The same is happening in real estate. If we're going to be lowering our cost to live a Canadian life, we need to be investing in housing. We need to be reaffirming our commitment to healthcare and extending access to healthcare and the services associated. And we need to combat the issues that are coming up here in the economy by making sure that there's a fair tax system that's grabbing more of the income coming off of more of the revenue that's being generated by the ultra wealthy, that is causing the separation between the working class and the millionaire class.
Thanks, Keith. Kallee?
Well, I think there's two pieces to this, right? There's the actual answer to what is causing Canadian life to be so expensive. And as Keith identified, it's a lot of profiteering corporations. It is decades of austerity. But then there are also individual voters who have come to believe that narrative, and we have to treat them differently. Any interaction when I'm in conversation with those who are inclined to vote conservative, I think we need to start with curiosity. I really start by asking them, what specific measures do you really believe are going to support the economic well-being of yourself and other Canadians? I guarantee there won't be a long list of what the Conservatives have put on the table, but starting with that curiosity and trying to understand where their specific pain points are, that gives us an opening to insert the NDP's solutions. And we have a real clear record of the Conservatives, and specifically Rob Williams, voting against measures that make life more affordable for Canadians. Specifically, he's voted against pharmacare, voted against dental care, voted against the National Child Care Strategy, even voted against measures to increase internet and phone plan competitiveness, voted against the school food program to ensure that kids are well fed when they go to school, and they voted against student loan forgiveness to skilled graduates working in rural areas, and so much more. Even things that seem relatively small in the grand scheme of things, the GST holiday, these are things that all of the Conservatives have voted against. And clearly the pattern is that they are not standing up for the economic well-being of Canadians. I also think we have to think about how to shift our messaging when we are talking to those who are not in our core. There's really compelling evidence that when social programs are framed as helping people attain economic self-sufficiency, right-leaning folks are more like.
And there's the buzzer. So just to reiterate, both nominees will have an opportunity to go to rebut the other persons as well. So I just wanted to reiterate that, and then I apologize if I didn't invite that before. Keith, would you like to offer any rebut to this previous?
I think, yeah, I will. What I'll offer in terms of right-wing politics, which I think is a bigger conversation, and it's a conversation about how people understand the world through the messaging and the people that they follow. And so my approach, many may be familiar with, is as things are having conversations in the social media sphere in general, is to provide as much context and information to the issues that have been at our tables specifically in that local government realm. And I think that's a conversation that is ongoing and always needs to be happening to A, give people some truth grounding in what's actually happening, but B, create an opportunity to listen and hear, as Kallee was saying, because I agree with that, what those pain points are. Because often the rhetoric that people are using out in the masses to beat each other with is really rooted down in how people are feeling that they're not getting ahead and they're slipping further behind. And that's what you have to address.
And I'll just briefly add to that, that Conservatives are also spendthrifts, right? Just in 2023 alone, and Liberals as well, the Canadian government provided at least $18.6 billion in financial support specifically to the fossil fuel and petrochemical industry. The majority of this was going to loan guarantees for the Trans Mountain Pipeline. So we cannot allow Liberals and Conservatives to continue this fiction that we are the only party that would spend a lot of money. Our priorities are simply different, and we are the ones who are investing that money smartly, directly in the places where it matters to Canadians and in the places where it allows everyday Canadians to have greater economic self-sufficiency as well.
Thanks, Keith and Kallee. Our next question, we move on to housing, the big topic. So housing prices and rents and a lack of available housing options are squeezing working families in Canada, and I will add, are squeezing us all, not just working families. We need a solution to bring down prices as soon as possible. What's your plan for tackling the housing emergency? Kallee.
Yeah, quite frankly, I think it's time for the federal government to be back at the table as a major investor in federal housing. It's easy to forget that prior to the 1970s, the majority of new housing starts in Canada had the backing of the federal government. In the 1970s, that dropped to 40% of housing starts, and by 1986, the federal government dropped its support to only 14% of housing completions, and only 8% of that was specifically directed to low-income Canadians. It's hard to look around and remember that the vast majority of our housing stock was backed by federal programs, specifically those like the Federal Cooperative Housing Program. That completely ended in 1992, but the majority of our cooperative housing buildings across the country are still from that era. They're requiring a great deal of support. I'm really grateful to see in the NDP platform a specific commitment to fast-tracking financing to nonprofits who are based in communities and ready to go. I know that right here in our community and across the riding, we have so many organizations that are ready to put that investment to work. They just need that fast-tracked, and they need it in their hands. That's on the supply side. I'm also grateful for measures that the NDP has earmarked to increase affordability for those that are looking to rent and buy. Specifically, the NDP will waive the GST portion of tax on the creation of new affordable rental units, as well for those who are able to buy and looking to buy. They will reintroduce 30-year terms to decrease monthly payments. And again, I think it's time to specifically double down on the investments, increase the investments that we're currently seeing in the National Housing Strategy to focus on low and middle income earners.
Thank you, Kallee. Keith.
Yeah, housing affordability is something I've been focused on the local government side for some time. I recognize that there's quite a lot of programming available, and the challenges that have been present not only in Nelson but beyond has been really bringing the stakeholders to the table in terms of planning projects, identifying land, and de-risking the entire process from what that building might look like to what the land use process may have as an outcome to what's going to go on with the financing afterwards. And it's a really complicated project for nonprofits and co-op organizations to take on. What helps is when we bring all of the facilitation and stakeholders together to workshop and brainstorm specific projects to get them in a pipeline that supports the needs assessments the province has been driving. Programming that's available, I would go back to what I've been saying before, which is we really need strong constituency support here in the riding. And we need that specifically because we need to be a place where people within community can come and say, I'm trying to navigate how to get the programming that is available for a project of that will meet a need within our community. And they're going to need that ongoing support from day one until the project is starting to put shovels in the ground. And that's a place where we can do a much better job here in the riding, providing that kind of constituency support to projects and to local government, and be that place where we can access and navigate the system that is available and funding that is available so that those projects are actually manifesting within our community. And I just think it's going to take a lot of hustle work and hustle work here in the riding to do.
Thanks, Keith. Kallee?
Yeah, I want to clarify that the reason I share that history of the federal government's past involvement in developing housing and supporting housing as a public good in Canada is we're often talking now about the increased financialization of the housing sector and the extent to which houses are now an investment more than a home. I really think it's not everyday Canadians that have fed that narrative. It is the federal government itself, because since the 90s, they have completely backed away until 2017, completely backed away from any investment in that space. I think it's starting at the federal level that this narrative has been created that housing is purely a market-based issue, and we need to push back on that. I'm very grateful to see as well that the NDP would introduce a 20% foreign home buyers tax to tackle some of that financialization that is coming from overseas.
Thanks, Kallee. Keith?
Yep. I'll give a specific example of where the federal programming touches projects. So one of the big advocacy pieces that local governments in the area have been petitioning both the province and the feds for some time is allocation-based funding or reliable funding based on having done good planning up front. And so when we're looking at projects that might impact the affordability crisis here in the regional district or here in Nelson, part of the problem is things like the Housing Accelerator Fund still sits behind a murkiness of indeterminate, of complicated applications and timelines that are hard to understand / opaque from the federal government as it tries to roll out these funds. We've had to petition pretty hard to make sure that rural communities specifically fit within the funding allocation and the funding programming eligibility coming from both the province and the feds on this side. And it's another space where we need to be petitioning a lot stronger to get these projects to access the funds they need.
Thank you both for your comments on housing, important issue. We're going to move on to polarization. So we know the carbon tax, it's been fueled so much by deliberate disinformation that every party is now backing away from supporting it. How do you explain the NDP plan to confront the climate crisis, reduce fossil fuel pollution, and tackle affordability? So now we're back to you, Keith.
Certainly. I'll try and be succinct and answer this in a few ways. So the first part is the disinformation campaign that's gone on around carbon pricing. And when we look at affordability specifically, we know and we understand, but running the numbers, that even in the grocery sphere, it's 1%, 50 cents on a $100 basket of food that's being contributed by carbon pricing. We know that because it's been a sticking point and a mantra that a drum has been beat on for the better part of the last number of years, that the public has a very different sense of what carbon pricing is doing to their affordability. Earlier this year or last year, when we went to the UBCM, the Union of British Columbia Municipalities, led a contingent here from the Kootenays to craft a resolution in response to David Eby backtracking from carbon pricing. And we shaped and I wrote a resolution and recruited other members of local government to bring an emergency motion from the floor. It got past the supermajority and it made it all the way to set a strong message from local government that we need to modernize carbon pricing, perhaps, but we don't need to be pulling it away, that we need to be costing in emissions and their impact on our economy. I also believe that we have a lot of conversation coming from the federal side of moving that kind of taxation on to industry players. I think we do need to, at this point, talk about what that regime looks like. Nelson has been involved throughout the implementation and the Supreme Court challenges brought by some of the provinces as an intervener to demonstrate that local government really understands that carbon pricing needs to exist in order to provide funding for us to manage the emergencies we're seeing and the impact of emissions on our local government work. So I support costing it, and I support having a conversation about what will make it most effective to get that costing in place.
Thank you, Keith. Kallee?
Thanks for that question, Amanda. And I think embedded in that very question is the reality that the NDP is really the only party that it intrinsically connects climate action, job creation, and tackling affordability within their platform. While committing to net zero by 2050, the NDP has a bold proposal that tackles global emissions while supporting a just transition for workers. And I truly believe that we are at the forefront of prioritizing workers within our changing economy. Firstly, building green infrastructure will work towards creating 1 million good jobs in Canada, specifically using Canadian-made steel, Canadian aluminum, cement, and wood products. Not only does that keep jobs here in Canada, it also allows us to reduce trade-based emissions from bringing those materials in from other places. Again, supporting that creation of good, family-sustaining jobs through these projects and prioritizing investments in communities like ours that are most affected by climate change. If we are prioritizing the development of new infrastructure projects in those areas that are most most affected and experience the greatest labor transitions already, we can stay ahead of the curve and keep supporting Canadian workers first and foremost. Additionally, supporting innovation in clean tech. This will happen through boosting research investment and innovation funding, specifically for clean technologies, as well as the adoption of a Buy Canadian procurement policy within those new green industries. All of those things taken together on top of additional measures to expand EI and support increased job retraining for those working across existing industries. It'll continue to prioritize the NDP as a leader, not only in climate action, but also in taking workers along.
Keith, do you have something to comment on Kallee's response?
I think the big thing here around transitioning workers is there's been a lot of great work going on here in the Kootenays, and it's about getting support for that work. We know that the biggest pieces of our missions profile when it comes to communities and rural communities is our transportation, and it's our built environment, it's our housing, and it's our commercial properties. And so we have great programming in terms of the Youth Climate Corps that has been piloted here in the region and has, through our advocacy, gotten provincial support. But it's a program that allows young people to get their hands dipped into the trades and focus on projects that support people retrofitting their buildings, nonprofits, serving the vulnerable populations, doing wildfire mitigation, all while learning skills that sets them up for success into the future. Things like the Youth Climate Corps are the kinds of programs that we want to take federal and model.
And I will just briefly add that the NDP platform is not only a leader in looking ahead to new projects and new developments and new industries, it's also about supporting workplaces right now. The NDP is supporting workplace environment committees to focus on helping employers shift to net carbon futures. They're also looking at measures to support sustainable agriculture. And as well, there's a commitment to tie any federal support to existing resource industries to commitments to commit to greener net zero futures as well, particularly for existing resource industries. Tying that funding to concrete, tangible plans to transition to a lower carbon future is going to be absolutely critical for those climate measures.
Thanks, Kallee. Keith, did you want to add?
I think one thing that's really getting just missed in this question, and it's my fault as much as anyone else's fault, is the emergency response piece. Our window of opportunity to lower emissions has come and gone. And I don't want to be draconian, but we need to prepare communities for what things look like with hydro whiplashes, with extreme heat, we're looking at major changes in the number of very hot days here in the Kootenays. So we're looking at large volumes of water coming through, having to hold it. I think we need to ensure that local government is well supported to reinforce our infrastructure and reinforce our ability to weather terrible weather patterns and what it's going to do to our food systems. And so we can continue to work really hard to reduce emissions, and we have to go net negative, and we have to simultaneously strengthen our local built communities and our food systems.
Kallee?
I'll briefly add as well that we also need to be focused on risk mitigation for specifically businesses and individuals who are impacted by climate effects. What we've seen so often, particularly in our agricultural communities, is that a frost snap will happen. vineyards will have 100% crop loss, these kinds of scenarios. And then industry groups are having to go with their hands out to the federal government and requesting support after the fact. I'm really committed to ensuring that that programming is in place upfront, that those resources are ready to go, that there's investment that can be accessed as soon as weather events happen to ensure that that support is making it as quickly as possible to those who need it.
Thank you. If only we were in government already. My gosh. So we're going to shift a little bit. And we started this conversation at the beginning, and so it's a really important one. Canadian governments all say that they put a priority on reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous people. But many folks say there is little or only very slow progress. What are your ideas for making some real meaningful progress with the ongoing crises of oppression and systemic injustices in our communities? Tough question, Kallee.
First and foremost, the Indian Act needs to go. This is a document that has enshrined the subordination and disenfranchisement of Indigenous Canadians across the country since its inception. It is time for that legislation to be replaced by a framework that supports genuine nation-to-nation negotiations. That is absolutely the elephant in the room for any conversation around reconciliation, and it is time for that entire structure to be reworked. Secondly, focusing on economic reconciliation by putting as much money as we can into the hands of not just Indigenous nations, but also Indigenous-led organizations, particularly Indigenous-led nonprofits that are in urban areas as well, that are not specifically serving reserves that are tied to that nation governance structure. There's all sorts of Indigenous-led community organizations across the country that, as I said with housing, are waiting for investment. They have that connection for community, and those are wonderful places to invest in grassroots reconciliation efforts. Additionally, we have vital legislation that was on the table in the House that has now been jeopardized due to prorogation. And it is absolutely incumbent upon the next government and incumbent upon the NDP to ensure that these proposals go forward. We're talking about Bill C-92 that specifically confirmed that Indigenous communities have the right to exercise jurisdiction over their child and family services. We know that child welfare programs have been called the next iteration of the residential school system that needs to be addressed. Similarly, Bill C-61 has been years, if not decades in the making, specifically to enshrine standards for water services in Indigenous communities. It's time to get that work done.
Thank you, Kallee. Keith?
Reconciliation is something that we've been working on for the last number of years. We're really, I think, in a certain way, lucky that the NDP here in the province have formalized UNDRIP and made it the law of the land. And everything that we do is focused around that. I've seen that firsthand, being a member of the local governments committee for the Columbia River Treaty the last number of years, and how we ensure that Indigenous partners are there as decision makers. That we're not just engaging them, but we are soliciting and requiring their prior and informed consent in the decision-making process. I also am incredibly open to having the Indian Act removed and having that consultation with our Indigenous First Nation partners to understand how that relationship with the federal government needs to change on a case-by-case basis. I am fully in support of providing jurisdiction around policing and healthcare and family services to Indigenous communities. In my role as the president of the Association of Kootenay Boundary Local Governments the last couple of years, we've reformed our bylaws and constitutions specifically to enable the participation as full members of the Indigenous communities within our area that meet the requirements of holding elections and having taxation authority, of which there are a few. so that they are there and can inform and move the organization along with their neighbors. I've been honored in the past to be invited by the Sinixt to provide welcome remarks to the city of Nelson as they've come through, and I have, as with everything, a relationship where we can have frank dialogue about what is necessary, and that's where it's going to come from. These are neighbors, and we have to be able to have strong conversations and build strong relationships to understand what next they would like us to be doing to support them.
Thank you, Keith. Kallee?
Sure. I will just reiterate the importance of specifically putting money and financial investments in the hands of Indigenous organizations, individuals, and nations to ensure that reconciliation projects and efforts are Indigenous-led, and that we as settlers are taking a back seat and we are walking alongside. That canoe journey event that Keith mentioned, that's an event that I've been on the coordinating committee for several years. My role in that is to hand out sandwiches. It was in the rain last year, right? It's about doing the grunt work and showing up in ways that that we are called upon to do. It's not the flashy work. It is the behind the scenes catering orders and looking for rain barrels to ensure that that proper protocols can be followed for sweat lodge ceremonies and these sorts of things. It's that not so glamorous work alongside nations.
Keith, any further comments?
I think one thing we just haven't touched on quite yet, and we're starting to see it, is that work around the land and access to the benefit of the resources available within that. And there are tough questions ahead in terms of how we have a joint scenario where we share environmental regulations, where we share standards, and where we deal with titles that need to be reformed and changed because there's expectations within our existing colonial system around resource industries, and it's time for those nations to take those into their own hand as they have capacity to do so, so that the benefit is flowing through them and through our what will be in the future a very diverse Canadian economy with many players and many stakeholders.
Thank you, Keith. Kallee, any further comments?
Just a very quick note that this conversation isn't only about benefits to Indigenous communities. To pull from what Keith was saying, we have so much to gain in terms of our shared stewardship of the land. It's not lost on any of us in this area that had communities been taking the lead from Indigenous knowledge holders around things like prescribed burning in our forests, we would be a lot better off. And it is for the sake of all of us that we double down and prioritize reconciliation in everything that happens in all levels of government and beyond.
Okay, we're now going to move on to our folks in the community who are going to be submitting their questions. So, don't forget the pitch. Oh, okay. You get to pitch before we ask questions? Woo woo. Okay, well, I'm just gonna. So, we flipped a coin in the beginning, so I assume we're going to reverse that for the pitch. Is that correct?
Oh, I think the pitch, Amanda, is actually your fundraising pitch.
Don't forget the pitch. No. My fundraising pitch? Oh, okay. Good. Well, we need that money to come in, right? Oh, the fundraising pitch. Oh,
the fundraising pitch.
oh my. It's my fundraising pitch. I see. Okay. Oh, I'll now invite. Oh, yes, right. Good. I'm getting notes here. I love it. I'm now going to invite Jacqueline McGregor, our amazing president, to say a few words before we go to your questions about fundraising.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm gonna do the pitch, and that's a slang term, and so not everybody knows that word. I was gonna have like a football pitch behind me, and I was gonna get all technical about that, but I'm just gonna we're gonna run out of time, and I really want to have time for people's questions. So here's what I want to say. We have a long history of flipping between the NDP and the Conservatives in our riding. Wayne Stetsky was elected in 2015. Alex Atamanenko was Member of Parliament in Southern British Columbia, Southern Interior from 2006 to 15. So we really know we can do this. And with the Conservatives surging nationally, it's really important that we rally together and we keep this seat we flip it back to NDP. So I'm not going to tell you all the reasons why, but we really need your support financially. In a couple of weeks, we're going to know whether it's Keith or Kallee, who we have picked to go into this next election period. We know for sure there is going to be an election sometime this year. And running a strong campaign takes resources. So we need to make sure our message reaches every corner of this riding. That means signs to show voters that the NDP has deep support. We need pamphlets. We need advertising dollars so that our message gets out loud and clear. A strong social media presence because digital messaging is so important these days. But we also need your time. And so the pitch today is about, I'd like each and every one of you here to think about possibly any hours that you have to spare, or maybe even conversations you can have with your neighbors or people at work to invite them to come and participate or vote for people in this large riding of ours. And we need people to help organize fundraisers, phone people, give people rides on election day. So Emerson's going to put up a link to our site, which is www.ndp-CKSR .ndp. Emerson, you're going to do that, right? And so it's NDPCA, and if you click on that, the donations go right to our writing. So again, thank you, everybody. This is a fascinating debate so far, and I'm going to hand this over back to Amanda. Thank you.
Hey, democracy happens when you show up. So that means show up with your dollars, show up with your time. I'm going to go to an important question from Seamus. Many young people feel disengaged from politics with issues like cost of living, affordability, climate change, and trust in our politicians. How will you make political participation more accessible to young folks? And how might, it's 2 questions in one, Seamus, I like it. Building it on. How might you build trust with your young folks? So Kallee, you were first last time, so Keith will go to you. Do you want me to repeat the question?
I think I've got it. People, especially young people, are losing faith with institutions because institutions have stopped serving them and they do not see them bending to the future that they predict. They see it in terms of us not taking appropriate and immediate action on climate and emissions. They see it around what has happened in Gaza and combating the human rights crisis that is the war crimes that are out there. And they see it in terms of the complexity of federal government and the news cycles that just don't connect with the day-to-day needs that they have. And so I think we have to ensure that our programming, like the Youth Climate Corps, is and worker supports that might be coming down the line and filling domestic chairs in our rural regional college institutions, is that we're making sure our programming works for youth, recognizes that the shift that's happened in this neoliberalism that's taken hold over the last 40 years has absolutely decimated the wealth of anybody that's under the age of 60 as a generation. And that we are turning the tide on that we are ensuring that they can, if someone goes and finishes with good grades in high school and goes off to college, that there's going to be a house at the other end of that process that they can afford, and a job that they can know is putting good work into the community, into the broader national fabric. And we have to make sure that everything that we're delivering is delivering for the future. And that's a lot of flowery words, but it's going to be just on the ground programming. It's going to be constituency work, ensuring that problem by problem and person by person, we're taking care of their needs as a group, and we're supporting them being the best damn Canadians they can be.
Kallee.
Okay. I certainly echo what Keith has shared. Essentially, keep your damn promises, 100%. Everyone's watching, and absolutely in terms of generational trends, not just in the way that youth and young people, I feel weird saying youth because I'm in my 30s, but the way that people are looking not just to government, but also to businesses is that they want increased transparency. We really need to talk about the way that we are coming to our decisions as a party. We need to be inviting young people into our process at the grassroots level more and more. When I really got involved in the Toronto Danforth Riding Association executive, it was because I showed up to a policy meeting to have a direct line of input into what was going on the conference floor. We need to involve more and more young people in the process. It really comes down to getting out and having one-on-one conversations. I had a great chat with Randy at Radio Free Kaslo, and what we started talking about was the way that my own interest in politics and the way that I'm sitting here was because of my direct contact with Alex Adamanenko and other wonderful politicians when I was growing up. We talked about the importance of getting into schools and having real face time with people so that they can see that the work of politicians is not just lip service. It is directly responding to emails and inquiries from constituents. It's doing really meaningful research. It's having meetings and learning and hearing from groups that are doing excellent work in communities. It's about showing up. And fundamentally, it is about showing up for young people across this riding, getting out, having more conversations. I was really grateful for the level of interest that sitting NDP MPs across the country took in my club, NDP McGill, when we were putting events together. They showed up. We invited them, and they came, and they had chats with us and community members about what was going on in the Harper government. We need to continue that pattern as potential MPs. We need to be committed to that outreach and showing up.
Thank you both. We're going to move on to our next question here from Lori. Lori, would you like to ask your own question? Look to the chat here for if Lori would like to ask her question.
I don't know if Lori would be able to let us know if she wanted to.
I think I'm unmuted now.
Oh,
There you go.
great.
Hi. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Kallee. And thank you to everyone else for showing up. I just think these forums are so important. My question has to do with the dental program that Jagmeet successfully maneuvered the Liberal government to implement across Canada for a lot of people who really need it. And I know people personally who, as soon as they had access to that, were making dental appointments. Some of them have not been a dentist chair for a decade or more. And so I think that that is one of the programs that could be at risk if there is a change in government. And so I want to ask you, Keith and Kallee, how will you, as part of the larger NDP caucus, work to preserve the dental program for those who truly need it?
We'll start with you, Kallee.
I'm also really grateful for this program. I remember supporting my mom and helping to get her application in and helping to make sure that she was covered under this program. She's still waiting to have a bridge done, and she's so excited. She's been waiting decades, genuinely decades, to have that done. I think it comes down to what we do best as New Democrats, which is mobilizing and organizing, because there are so many people who believe in this program. And if we can organize in our communities and ensure that no matter whose representative, which party is representing a riding, that we can mobilize to ensure that those representatives here, this is not something that should be on the chopping block. We do know overwhelmingly that politicians are not rewarded for cutting services that Canadians have come to rely on. We've seen this with the Conservatives in their past governments. We've seen this with past Liberal governments as well. As soon as there is an attack on existing benefits that Canadians have come to know and appreciate and value, whether they're NDP voters or Conservative voters. I know that there's going to be a lot of Conservative voters using this program as well. As soon as it is out there and as soon as it's having a success, if we can organize those folks who are getting that benefit and ensure that every party hears the value, I think we can do good work. And also the beauty of this program, and like all of the NDP programs, is that there are cost savings by having people be able to invest in the kind of preventative care that they need and not have to seek emergency services when things become dire. MPs of all parties sit in committees, the finance committee, all sorts of committees, and those are opportunities to do that detailed costing and share those arguments internally as well and defend these programs as deeply cost effective and meaningful to Canadians.
Thank you, Kallee. Keith?
I think in the context of the upcoming election, it's about highlighting stories and getting community buy-in from the business sector. Dental is always one of those many things as an employer that you're trying to put together for your workers, and that is the reality for many small businesses. I know the chamber does great work in that space, but we have an opportunity through the election. We have lots of great stories to highlight, and it's about making sure that we're putting that front and center and letting people know how much it's changing lives. I'm hearing constantly as I talk to people stories of people who've gotten onto the Canadian dental program and how much of a difference it makes for them to just take care of their health. I think we continue to tie that funding where we can when we get back into a legislative session to the Canadian Health Act and push for more universal coverage and make sure that we're making those legislative links strong and unviable for conservatives to roll back into the future, because it is really linked to our just overall health, and it's so important from that perspective. And we have to actively counter the misinformation. There will be incorrect facts and figures. There'll be outrageous claims, and we need to be able to effectively and concurrently push back against that kind of narrative as it comes up. So I think we have a great opportunity and a great program, and it's just time to celebrate it and where we can strengthen it on the legislative side when we get back into session.
Thank you, Keith. We're going to go on to our next question. I will remind our community folks, love the humanity, love the gratitude. Let's get to the questions so we can move through a few different topics tonight. This one's a tough one. Get ready. What is your stance on the LNG export? Okay, Keith, I believe you're up first here. Thank you.
I think whatever we're doing within the energy sector needs to be we need to be withdrawing subsidization for emissions-based industries. It's been far too long, both on a global scale and a Canadian scale, that we have been supplementing the income of these industries in order to get them off the ground. And we need to stop doing that. And they need to be seen in the scope of a broader transition to a fully renewable and net zero economy. And so we need to be looking at both what we're charging, what the royalties look like in that space, and where we're providing supports. And we need to retract those supports, and we need to be extracting a toll on that kind of emissions heavy fossil fuel-based piece and make sure that it fits within a larger international framework and strategy to reduce overall global emissions. There are real benefits at times to displacing coal burning in Asia. We hear that, and we need to make sure that we are actually validating that supply chain and ensuring that if this is a temporary move, that there is indeed a transition that is occurring and that we are sunsetting these assets, and that we are holding companies accountable for dealing with the orphaned wells and the orphaned infrastructure that continues to bleed emissions long after the corporate entities that built them in the first place happen. And we need to ensure that there is a cleanup plan on a federal basis throughout all the provinces to bring in and retire those facilities so we are not continually adding to our emissions profile that has gotten way out of hand.
And I'm going to be really blunt on this. I think it's time that this project dies. In Canada, we have seen the cost of the LNG project grow by 70%. Specifically, the Cedar LNG project in Kitimat has ballooned from 2.4 to 3.4 billion. This is completely an unsustainable project that by the time it's completed as well will be long past the thresholds that we've set for net zero. Those calculations as to the very poor economic case for this expansion doesn't even take into account the increased costs that we will need to incur to respond to additional climate change emergencies. It's not taking into account the cost of the carbon that will be emitted as a result of this project. Any way you slice it, I think the math simply doesn't add up, and it is unwise for continued investment in this project.
Okay, well, we've had an incredible evening so far. This will be our last question, so everyone can. It's gonna go to Jane Burton. Jane, would you like to ask your final question for this evening before we go to closing remarks?
Okay, I think I've been unmuted. Good, thanks, Keith. Simple question, difficult answer, no doubt. How will you differentiate the NDP from the Liberals when the Conservatives have spent a great amount of time branding us as being the same as the Liberals?
Oh, Amanda, you're muted. Is it coming to?
That goes to you, Kallee. Thank you.
I thought so, but wanted to check. Thank you for that question, Jane. There's a conversation that came up when we were out in Kimberley that led to my sharing of an analogy around a fire hose, right? If the Liberals have a fire hose in hand and they are throwing money trying to tackle symptoms of broader economic disease, they're trying to throw water on the housing problem, and they're trying to throw water on the healthcare problem, and they're trying to throw water, on failing emissions targets. We're never going to get to the level of community health that we need to be at. And I think this is where the NDP is inherently different than the Liberals. We don't leave these solutions up to a market-based economy, see where they break, and then try to fix it. What we're looking at is how do we create sustainable solutions that support good jobs, that support healthy communities, and at the same time solve the pain points that we are all experiencing. And we can do that only through really ambitious solutions on the revenue end of the economic equation, not just on the spending end. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in my closing remarks.
Keith.
I'd break it down into a few pieces. Fundamentally, the big parties in Canada, the Conservatives and the Liberals, are very much in the service of corporations. The Liberals have often passed policies, consistently set messaging that is to a large corporate interest of their party fundraisers. And the NDP in this last minority government, we always see throughout the history of Canada how much we get done when we're in a minority position, and there's that pressure from the worker side, from the NDP side, to have a fair tax system, to push and deliver not always flashy, but certainly impactful dental care and expanded pharmacare added into the Healthcare Act. And we often see in this riding specifically, it's an NDP conservative conversation. We make it about the record that Rob Morrison has set for himself over the last 6 years, and we demonstrate that these ideas coming from a big party backbencher of just phoning in and having this role as a title demonstrates the lack of effective work he's gotten done in community across the riding because he hasn't put the work in. And the NDP is the worker party, and we do the work, and we do it for our members and for all Canadians. And as much as there's a conversation in Toronto or Vancouver, the conversation here is NDP or Conservative. And we continue to explain how when we looked at climate energy policies, the Liberals talk a big game and then they expand subsidies. We push for real transition for our workers and our investments in renewable energy. And we make that distinction between the record.
Okay, that is the buzzer. Thank you to our community for sharing your questions. If you have more questions that are burning, please reach out. I'm sure Keith and Kallee are still happy to answer questions, and whether that's in person or via email. Yeah, we're all ready to answer your questions. You can even email me. I'm happy to share with you my insights on these amazing topics. We're going to move to our closing remarks. We're going to set that at a minute 5 is what was put on my agenda here for this evening. So I guess we went back and forth. Who would like to go first? Closing remarks. Keith, thank you.
I think I'm next in my own internal calculus, and as much as you can trust it.
I appreciate that, Compass. So thank you, Keith. On to you.
So the message I would have is I have demonstrated over the last 6 years my commitment to working with everybody to try and solve really difficult problems and to wade into really difficult questions, even when it makes me a bit of a lightning rod in terms of where people are frustrated, to address poverty or street disorder or housing or even recreation. And my commitment the last number of years when I sit down and chair various committees and meetings and am asked by my peers to do so is to create a space where people can have conversations and to ask at times when we can bring in more voices, and to also support people having clarity, even if their ideas or the way they've been brought or framed are not necessarily the strongest. I'm always desiring within the spaces that I'm working to make sure people are understood and that the best ideas have a chance to be discussed and have their space. And that's a commitment I would continue to take into being your member of parliament. I would continue to make sure that we're actually dealing with the bread and butter issues here in the riding and delivering benefit here to communities and to local government. I hear so often the difficulties managing the larger federal system, and I think we need to provide real support to our community residents and our local governments to do it.
Thank you, Keith. Kallee?
I'm going to focus on why Canadians desperately need the NDP in this next election. We are going to see the Liberals shifting to the right. They are trying to capture that center-right space within the electorate, and it is up to the NDP to defend the kinds of progressive solutions that Canadians deserve, specifically around tax policy. The 100 wealthiest Canadians in 2023 raked in $13 million each. We are not imagining this cost and affordability crisis. We are experiencing it every single day, and that is why. There are real, concrete, progressive tax changes that need to be introduced. We need MPs with clarity and policy finesse in order to do that. We need to increase the progressivity of our tax system, specifically to ensure that it's fair at the upper ends. We are radically behind other OECD countries in ensuring a progressive tax base, and that's what will equip us for the future when it comes to allowing us to respond to increasing climate incidents and crises, to investing in the growth of the middle class, well-paying jobs, and the green economy, to supporting our youth with increased opportunities for education, and so much more. We need the NDP, and it's absolutely critical that we show up.
The buzzer. Thank you both, Kallee and Keith, Keith and Kallee. We're going to go now to our president, Jacqueline, who's going to close off our evening. I'm going to leave it to Emerson. There we go.
All right. I just have a couple more things to say. Thank you everyone for coming today. And I just wanted to let our riding know that our president, Dave Gregory, has been away sick. And so he'll be back at one point, and I'm stepping in as acting president. We've got a very vibrant executive that was voted in just a few months ago. And I just want to thank everyone who has participated and volunteered with supporting Keith and Kallee to get to all the communities. All of the people who have come and helped us at the various communities in Caslow and so on. So I'd really like to thank everybody's efforts. And it has been an amazing debate tonight. And thank you, Amanda, for moderating. And yes, if you can, go to our sites, if you can, and get in touch with us, we'd be happy to hear from you. And we'll see you on February 27th in Nelson for the official nominating committee meeting. Okay, thank you.